So today on Forward Think, we'll be delving into that topic of what's next for critical illness cover with our expert panel of speakers. We'll also be finding out some of those statistics within that CIExpert report and indeed some of the wider statistics out there. We'll hear from somebody that's claimed on their policy and hear her sharing her story. And at the end, we'll have a live Q&A. So make sure you get your questions prepared for that. I'm joined today by two expert speakers, Zoe Prisolak, Protection Advisor and Director of Waymore, and Paul Roberts, Proposition and Distribution Director at CIExpert. Let's take a look at some of the headline numbers and indeed some other statistics that I think help to set the scene a little bit here. Just a reminder as well that we'll have a live Q&A at the end, so make sure you do get your questions in. So Paul, it's fair to say as the last 40 years since critical illness cover was first sort of introduced, the world's changed enormously in that time. And what have been some of the kind of evolution milestones in those 40 years as far as KIC's concerned?
Well, Rob, you're right, it has changed, but ultimately the template is still the same. So what's happened over the last 38 years or so is that the first change really came in 2003 when additional payments were added in. Children's cover came in around 2009, child-specific conditions came in around 2011, but ultimately it remains the same. You either get a full payment, an additional payment, or you get an enhanced payment for some things, and sometimes you can accelerate payments, but ultimately the product itself remains largely unchanged. And I think what we have at the moment is the opportunity to not change the products so much, but change the way we view how we use them and how we engage with them and how we bring them to life for consumers. And I think what happened within critical thinking was it was clear that consumers don't understand what they have, what they buy, what they can use it for, and what they can do with the wider parts of a critical illness or serious illness plan available today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess from your perspective, Zoe, you're as an advisor, at the coalface, are you sort of seeing consumer needs changing, kind of a shift in expectations? What are your experiences of actually kind of talking to consumers about this product?
Yeah, absolutely. So it may be, the same or similar triggers, buying a home, having children, getting married, but certainly the needs and what, the product, what the payout is used for. So, traditionally, years ago, it may have been, a joint life or critical illness decreasing policy to pay off a mortgage. The mortgage payment may very much have been seen as, a large proportion of what the expenses were. Now everything has gone up in cost. So now in terms of what things might be used for, you may be looking at more so an income protection policy to cover, general expenses and mortgage payments. But in terms of the critical illness, looking for that lump sum payment for the additional costs that come with being unwell or critically ill. It could also be, to enable your partner to be able to take time off work to spend with you if you are critically ill. That would affect their income, they would lose their income. Concerns around, the NHS and people wanting to use critical illness cover to fund, private treatment or certainly a diagnosis. The fact now that more people are getting unwell, but they are surviving. These illnesses now aren't always critical. They may be more serious illnesses, but it's still having a financial impact. And then the consumer is worried about, well, what if there's a reoccurrence of this, or what happens if, what if I am, critically ill, due to another condition or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, isn't it? I suppose, in the last few years it's been slightly accelerated, but the way that people live their lives is changed dramatically. And Paul, we've obviously also seen big changes in medical science. We've highlighted there in some of those statistics that people are surviving illnesses more than was the case in the past. And I guess all that's having a big impact, isn't it, on critical illness cover and how these products work?
Very much so. It's certainly highlighting the need for people to have it in the first place. Yeah. More conversations have been had. I think the change in the way that people buy products is quite important too. And I think one of the things that stood out for us is how low the confidence in advice actually is within the report, but how important good advice is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that stood out for me in the report, and I think it was a sort of that overarching message, is that the big challenge we have is that consumers just don't understand. They're not aware of they're not aware of often protection full stop, but critical illness cover, serious illness cover, is that something you encounter, a real kind of lack of understanding and awareness of how this works and what they might have, looking online and the like?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly I often come across individuals that think that they have critical illness cover and it's terminal illness cover. A lack of understanding of the different products and how they do different things, and what they can be used for. A lack of understanding that there can be additional payments, accelerated payments, but equally not understanding that typically if there has been a full payout, then that policy ends, and it may well be that the consumer can't get any more cover. I do have sometimes I've had individuals approach me and say I've now had the all clear, so I'd like to look at putting some cover in place. So lots of misconceptions, lack of understanding, and again a big one is these policies don't pay out. Well, we know that they do, high into the 90% they do.
Yeah, it's a really important point, that it's one we'll come on to in a moment, that challenge of getting clients to recognise that policies do pay out, and actually there's some really powerful case studies and stories out there that really talk to that. And Paul, you mentioned a moment ago that there's a real opportunity for advisors here to add value. One of the things from the report is that a lot of people are going online and they're maybe not getting the right information, not getting good advice. I guess the other variable we've got to consider now as an industry, for advisors and for us as product providers, is also Consumer Duty's kind of changed the regulatory landscape a little bit. There's obviously now a real kind of focus on quality, and you obviously work for a business that is about supporting advisors to choose a quality recommendation rather than a price-driven one. And I guess that's a really important consideration now, isn't it, is quality of cover.
With consumers doing the research themselves, it kind of lends itself really well to then going to seek advice, so that the advisors can reinforce all the strengths of a modern day KIC plan and the benefits that can give to the client, their dependent families, or any children they may have. And a critical illness plan isn't just about the person who has it, it's about their family, it's about their partners and their children, and how does that blend itself into the solution that high quality advisors like Zoe delivers the advice to their clients. And I think the opportunity for all of us is to slightly view things in a new way, to take the opportunity to look to combine products and deliver a wider range of solution than they may have done in the past.
Yeah, and that sort of point around quality, consumer understanding, I guess consumer expectations as well is a really important one. Is if we think about what consumers expect a product like critical illness cover to do, do you find that there's maybe a bit of a disconnect? I'm thinking here that people's experience of insurance, car, home insurance, general insurance will be that it's something you have in place, you might claim on multiple times, but I guess critical illness is quite unique in that if someone claims for a full payment condition, it pays out, it finishes, they're often left uninsured and uninsurable. Do you find that kind of when discussing products like this with consumers, there is a slight disconnect there between their expectations and how the product works?
So yeah, in terms of consumer expectations, I mean, first of all, if they are unwell, they will expect a payout. But as we know, there can be quite strict definitions. Somebody may not be critically ill, but they could be seriously unwell, and that could still have a financial impact. They could still be off work for, a few months at a time. A consumer in that situation would be expecting, the policy that they have to pay out. Equally, they will compare critical illness cover to other types of general insurances, buildings and contents insurance, travel insurance, car insurance, where you can obviously make a claim, but then the cover is still there for you to claim on again in future.
Yeah. I think it's it's interesting, isn't it, how, yeah, I suppose apart from life insurance, critical illness is one of the few products that when you claim on it, if it does pay out in full, that's it, it's gone. And I guess thinking about some of those advances in, we've spoken about it already, does there need to be a bit of a kind of reassessment of that?
I think so, and you're right, that a critical illness plan, apart from a life cover plan for obvious reasons, is the only one that stops on a full payment claim. And you've got to kind of ask yourself, why is that? Because the time you need kick most is probably when you've just had a claim. But most insurers in the kick plan, that plan stops. So that reinforces the need for additional payments that have developed so well across the last 10 years or so. But it's awareness, and what's interesting in Critical Thinking 2024 is what consumers actually use the proceeds of a payout for. Now, we all assume that if it's linked to a mortgage, they walk straight into their lender and repay the loan. Well, of course, they don't do that. Whether they should do or not is entirely up to their personal circumstances and the advice they get from their advisor. But it gives them the choice to be able to do what they think is best for them at the time, with the knowledge that they have some funds available to them when they need it most. And our role in all of this is, of course, is to provide those funds in the right way for the right person at the right time. And as medical science has advanced, and it will continue to advance, then how we use protection and insurance plans in the future becomes even more important, because life expectancy will grow. Cures for things will come along that we don't know about today. So the importance of a high quality critical illness, serious illness solution becomes even more important in the future.
Yeah, and it's a really good point as well you make there, Paul, and it's one of the reasons why I suppose, when Vitality refreshed and enhanced the serious illness proposition last year, deliberately making that choice to make give the client the ability to claim multiple times in full on the 2 times and 3 times product, whilst continuing as well with that sort of severity-based cover that allows for those multiple claims. So.
Yeah, it's a really important part of a critical illness, serious illness plan that was lost when Old Mutual was closed down, because Old Mutual had to cover continuation. So it's really refreshing for us to see Vitality reintroduce it, but improve it in a way, because we don't have to wait. There's no deferred period. There's no additional extra cost. You don't have to be underwritten. You don't lose your GIOs. There's a tremendous amount of positivity around having the ability to continue cover immediately after a full payment claim on a Vitality 2 times and 3 times plan.
Yeah, I found it fascinating reading the report that the statistics around what people are using the payouts for, as you say, Paul, the expectation when we give advice is that, yeah, client pays off the mortgage, but we know from the findings that's not happening. And for you as an advisor, what does that mean therefore? Are you having to kind of reevaluate the sorts of recommendations you give and the advice that you give clients? What do you kind of take away from that as an advisor that's actually advising these clients on which solutions are best suitable for their needs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as an advisor, you should be advising holistically and recommending a blend of products, because what we want to ensure is that if a consumer is paying for something, that regardless of what happens, there is something there for them. There is a financial safety net. So if you have the income protection in place to be covering expenses, mortgage, that type of thing, great. But what happens if the individual does have a serious illness and they're just off for 3 months, let's say, and their deferred period on the income protection doesn't kick in until 3 months? Or what if they are critically ill but then pass away quite suddenly? Again, that income protection won't have paid out. So each of those the different products, they work together holistically, to provide that robust financial solution. And it's our job to explain that to clients, as to why, and then make that recommendation to make sure that they are protected, as well as we can protect them, basically.
Yeah, it's so important, isn't it, that we know that there is a real lack. People don't have adequate protection in place to keep them financially resilient should something happen. And it's such an important point, isn't it, that advice does need to be holistic. It's about moving away from that sort of tick box. Yes, we've done decreasing life insurance, they've got a mortgage, and that sort of job done. It's, as you say, it's making sure that the point you made around choice and making sure that they've got the most comprehensive cover.
I think the opportunities for advisors today is huge, and the opportunity to innovate in their protection solutions is also huge, because we all talk about adults and adult claims, but children claim too. And of course, if we have a plan that we sell on an adult and they make a full payment claim and they've got children, that children's cover has stopped as well, through no fault of their own. So there are alternatives to doing that, and we just need to work with advisors to help them understand what those are, and then explain this to consumers so consumers understand what they're buying and how they buy, and they buy individual plans, not joint life first event ones. They have a balance of approach, so they have different insurers perhaps for different reasons, and to make sure it's a blend of, you know, lump sum and income, whether that's a life and family income benefit critical illness plan, for example, or it could be income protection, or it could be a combination of all of those things put together. The important thing from today is we all have those conversations about how we innovate the advice in the future, not just the products.
Yeah.
And also for me, you know, the value added benefits as well within the plans, you know, I think are a really important part of that advice as well. It also shows consumers how they can use their policy now.
Yeah, and I suppose an interesting thing, you know, we hear a lot about the kind of wider health of the population as well, and you know, how that's sort of been in decline in the last few years. So I guess there's also a challenge in the industry, isn't there, about not only being there for people when they need to claim, but actually what more can we do to hopefully prevent claims from happening in the first place by, as you say, through different benefits and things, helping people to live a kind of healthier life. But look, you know, you mentioned earlier on that ultimately, you know, at the moment, a lot of people don't expect policies to pay out. There's a real kind of lack of consumer understanding as well. And I think, see, one of the things we've spoken about here is that when it's done right, you know, a quality recommendation can make a real difference to a client's life. And I want to just turn now to a real life example of somebody that you know, has claimed on a policy and has been kind enough to share their really powerful story with us.
I need you to get straight to hospital. I need you to pack a bag. You can be there a while. My name's Hayley Morris, and I am a business consultant and tend to navigate that around the jugglings of motherhood. There's me and my partner David. He's got 2 girls, and then I've got Bella, my 10-year-old. I get to walk to school every day, which is one of the perks I think every parent likes to enjoy, and then take her to her regular after-school activities, which is swimming, ice skating, musical theatre, jazz, all the usual stuff. I woke up on a Sunday morning and found like I couldn't quite get a full breath, and I remember lying there during the night thinking, this is horrific. I booked a Vitality GP appointment, did a couple of tests on my breathing, and just said, you need to get to A&E and you need to go now. When I got to A&E, they were very quick and said that it was a pulmonary embolism, so it was a blood clot in my lung. It's one of the unique conditions that Vitality cover, so it isn't something that anybody else would cover. It paid out and then meant that we could relax a little bit. Turning 36 for me was quite a big thing because my mum died when she was 36. And in the year that I was due to turn 36 was when I had my blood clot, which made me question my mortality quite a bit. Just as I thought, okay, I've kind of hit my 36, I've managed to surpass, you know, my family bloodline. And then I started with some muscle weakness. Literally within the space of 2 weeks, it started to affect my jaw. Then I started struggling with my swallowing. So I went through my Vitality health cover and started to explore what it could be. So I saw the consultant on the 14th of September. By the end of the test, he was like, that is without doubt myasthenia gravis. And he said, I need you to get straight to hospital. I need you to pack a bag. You can be there a while. Because we need to start you on treatment straight away. One of the things that they like to try and do as part of the treatment, when the neurologist confirmed about the myasthenia gravis, he said, we'll do a CT scan on your thymus gland to rule out any thymoma, but it's basically just like a tumour. The biopsy confirmed that it was a B1 thymoma, which basically means that it was cancer. That then enabled us to make a second claim on the Vitality serious illness policy that we've got. The second claim paid out in full. It's given us the ability to go, right, we really have some breathing space now. And what makes it even more of a walking advertisement for it is cover still continues. So although the policy paid out, David still has cover, I still have cover if it comes back or if I get anything else. It hugely helped knowing that I had the cover. I knew that Bella could still, have money when she wants to get married and buy her own house and things like that. If everything I've gone through can help anybody in some way, then it kind of gives it a silver lining. We're a normal family. We are normal people. From a cover perspective, it's done wonders for us. And everyone I speak to, when I tell my story, says the same thing. I generally get the response of, I really need to think about that. And I'm like, don't think, just do. Don't think about it, just do it. Life's too short.
Well, look, I'm delighted to have Hayley joining us today. I've seen that a few times and it still gets me seeing that video. So, Hayley, first of all, thank you for joining us and thank you for sharing your story. Perhaps just give us a bit of a sense of what it was like kind of going through that and actually experiencing it as somebody claiming on one of these products that we talk about.
I think when you first start feeling unwell of any sort, you want to know what it is. And I think the minute you go down the journey of a diagnosis of any kind, you start thinking about all the things you didn't do. You start thinking about all the things that you should have done. And for me, it was, well, what if it is? What if it isn't? Obviously, it was a bit of a whirlwind few years with the initial diagnosis of the pulmonary embolism. And obviously that being quite a unique claim, being something that only Vitality covered, gave us a bit of breathing space financially, which I know I mentioned on the video. And you suddenly start to go, well, what does my future hold? I've spent 36 years of feeling like, talking about it, but feeling like, oh, it's never really going to happen to me. And you hope it's never going to happen. And the minute it does, you go, oh, wow. Like, what's my future now going to look like? And having that breathing space to go, okay, we don't quite know what this then means. But financially, thank God we had something.
Yeah. And you, when we spoke before, you said, there's that almost how different it would have been had you've not had that cover in place. And you mentioned kind of having to write these letters to your daughter. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when obviously the build up to the surgery, because it was such a risky thing anyway, we had to go down the whole conversation of what happens if. And obviously having grown up without a parent, you go to all of those places. And I wrote letters. Obviously I wrote them as a mum. I wrote them obviously to my daughter, to my family, to my partner, with all of the things that I wanted to happen if I wasn't here. And whilst that's something that no parent ever wants to go through, it's such a hard thing to do, and not many people get the opportunity to be able to write those letters. But the biggest thing I remember through that whole process was the feeling of writing them knowing that worst case scenario, if something went wrong and I wasn't there on the other side, that Bella would be okay. Financially, she would be okay. The only thing she would have to deal with was the grief side of it. Writing the letters was it was a lot easier to write knowing that I had those financial provisions in place than had I been writing them with regret of not having sorted them out, not having had protection in place in the background.
Yeah. And I guess we can't prevent people from falling ill and being diagnosed with conditions, but I suppose as an advisor, putting cover in place is about, as Hayley's just described there, it's about making a difficult situation easier. And I think you mentioned the other day, you've had experience of what happens when someone doesn't have protection?
Yeah, absolutely. So my mum was diagnosed with cancer when I was 15, and she passed away just after I'd turned 18 a few years later, and she didn't have any cover in place at all. She didn't work, she was a housewife. However, that severely impacted, you know, the household financially, because my father didn't work for the last sort of year, 18 months that she was unwell. They spent their savings on alternative treatments when it was obvious that the, you know, traditional chemo and radiotherapy wasn't going to work. And, you know, after she passed away, my father was left with, you know, two teenage children, one going to university, you know, a mortgage, you know, no work really, because he was self-employed and obviously hadn't worked for, you know, for over a year. So that financial impact was huge, you know, at a time when he just needed to be able to grieve. You know, and it's one of the reasons why, you know, I did move into the industry. On top of that, I myself had, you know, the experience of being in quite a serious road traffic accident over a decade ago, and I didn't have any cover in place at the time because I didn't have any children, and you know, I didn't think I needed it, and I thought I was invincible. So you know, those personal experiences really drove me to have you know, a change of career and come into the protection industry, and really, you know, help to get that message out to everybody of, you know, how important it is to have this cover in place and the difference it does make when you do have it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hayley, you know, you said at the end of the video there, it's don't think, just do. It's I guess there's a real call to action there, isn't there, for people to...
Yeah, I think, you know, it's the time that you suddenly see the value in this thing, as Paul mentioned earlier on, is when it happens. That's when you see the true value of this kind of cover. And, you know, everybody I speak to who raises the subject, it's like, whatever you get, just get something. Because, you know, it's having the choice of what to do. And that's, you know, you kind of start thinking about everything that potentially could happen in the future, and having that financial flexibility to go, right, we can take the kids on holiday if we want to, we can pay the mortgage off, we can, you know, do whatever. You don't know what the future holds, and you don't really realise how much that is true until something happens. When you go through something like the last 3 years, it changes your mindset, it changes your view. You have, you know, obviously there's all the mental health side of things from, you know, going through it and coming out the other side, and the ongoing, you know, condition to take into consideration as well. But it's knowing that all that is made such a difference because we had the protection, and we were able to, you know, give the kids something back. That was probably one of the biggest things when I kind of started to feel better from recovery, was I want to give the kids some life back, because for the last 3 years, they've gone through it with us. You know, they've experienced it all, they've seen it all. So to be able to give something back to them, I think is key. And, you know, that's what protection does. It gives you that choice to be able to do what you want to do for your family.
Yeah.
And I always say, you know, to clients, if something was to happen, you will always wish that you had more.
Yeah.
You know, and that is the bottom line. If something does happen, you know, you want to make sure that you do have that financial protection in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's probably fair to say, isn't it, Hayley, that in your particular circumstances, the type of cover that you had in place made a huge difference. You mentioned that the first claim was for something that was unique and isn't covered really by anybody else in the market. And then, of course, that going on to claim a second time for something else completely different and unrelated. So that made a real difference, I think, in your circumstances, didn't it?
Yeah, because when you look at the first claim, not only is it something that, you know, before the cover, I didn't really know what it was. And then obviously experiencing one, and you go, wow, this isn't very nice. And then obviously getting that financial kind of cash injection, so to speak, you know, getting a payout of a lower severity just made us kind of go, oh, that's great. But I think the key thing from previous conversations that we've had is that most products in the market wouldn't have actually kicked in unless I'd gone on to have a stroke or a heart attack. And I think, you know, 3 years down the line, I haven't experienced either of those two things. So, you know, if I'd had a critical illness product, I'd never have seen the value from that particular side. Whereas, you know, the cover that I do have, not only did I experience something that was completely unique that nobody else covered, but obviously, you know, like we've already talked about today, the cover's carried on. There has been a second claim in full, and cover still continues. Because I know, anybody I speak to who has gone through any form of diagnosis, you don't worry about what else could happen. You worry about going through the same thing again, something else coming back.
Yeah.
So having cover that carries on when you've been through a diagnosis, it's worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, absolutely. And Paul, I guess this story sort of speaks to that discussion we've been having around, where does this, what does the future hold for this? We're seeing examples like Hayley's, but we know from the statistics we've shown earlier that these things happen, and actually there's a real need to kind of think about how products can be designed to better meet those needs.
I think the most important thing is that everybody has conversations about it, and everybody watching this webinar today, I'm sure that we would all ask is that when you speak to any of your clients next, you make sure you have those conversations, that you reinforce the experiences that you've gained from watching programs such as this, and you take on board everything that any research has provided to underpin what the advice that you should give should be about. And there are a range of solutions out there, and having the ability to continue cover is one of those, but it's an important part. And unique conditions are also important, but other insurers have conditions too. But it's understanding what's available across the market, but speaking to an advisor who understands those too is the most important thing. Trying to do it yourself isn't something I think you can do. And what it means is that others like Hayley and Zoe and their experiences and their clients could also benefit. And we're in a very fortunate position in this industry because there are millions of pounds paid out every day in claims across the protection industry in general. And our role is to try and give people the opportunity to claim more if they need it. But they can only do that if they have the right plans in place for them at that time. And we all have that opportunity. So does everybody watching this video today, because they can have that extra conversation the next time they speak to their client to make sure they give them the advice that they deserve and that their families need.
Yeah, it's such an important point, isn't it? That, we've spoken about kind of the changing needs of consumers and what clients expect. And it really comes down to the value that an advisor can add in helping that client navigate those different options and understand their needs and arrive at a solution that's suitable for them ultimately, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there are three things that need to change. First of all, it is the perception of using an advisor, compared to online. We know that we have access to better products, we can give them advice. We can do, the pre-sales side of it, look at the underwriting for them. We can help them with a claim, we can fight their corner. We need to get that across to consumers first of all. Then we also need to look at the product itself. If a consumer has a critical illness product, they want it to pay out when they need it, so that is something that will cover something that maybe is serious and not critical, and that will give them the ability, to claim on it again, because more often than not people are surviving after an illness, and then they do need something still in place. Yeah,
and I guess if we want to answer that question, Hayley, that we've kind of posed as part of this webinar is what's next for critical illness, it's that it's a hugely important product. Your story tells us that. Yeah,
and the difference it can make is massive. The difference not having it can make as well. But again, it all boils down to two things. It's the choice, but also I think the biggest thing for me is that regret, like Zoe mentioned earlier on, of the biggest regret of what if you don't do it. I said it in my video. It's it's a case of just don't think about it, just do it. Something is better than nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can't avoid it anymore with Consumer Duty, and that we know that there's that big protection gap and that households don't have adequate cover, and there's that opportunity to really make a difference, isn't there, as an industry?
And I think the opportunity also exists in the continual contact that advisors have with their clients and the importance of annual reviews and making sure that those are built into the advice process of every advisor watching this call. There's no reason whatsoever why you wouldn't go back and review your client. They're your clients. You have to look after them. Protection plans aren't just for the day you sell them, they're for life. But so is the advice that you give. So you should stick with them and make sure that you're there all the way so they don't ever get to a situation where they don't understand what they have. Critical thinking told us that the consumers who buy products don't understand it. So our role together is to encourage regular engagement between advisor and client, so the client is continually aware of what they have, what they can claim for, and all the peripheral benefits and added value services are available, so that they are always available when your client needs them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, it's been a really interesting conversation. Been really interesting speaking to all three of you, and Hayley, once again, thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your story. As I said, I've seen it a few times, but it's still, I think, a really, really powerful example of the difference that getting it right can make. And Paul, thank you very much for sharing your insights off the back of the critical thinking report, and Zoe, your experiences as an advisor. It's been really useful. I hope those watching have found it really interesting and insightful.